I wasn't searching for giants when I began studying Siberian logging operations between 1870 and 1910. My research was focused on labor structures in pre-revolutionary Russia, work crews, timber quotas, seasonal camps carved into the taiga to fuel imperial expansion. It was conventional economic history, production records, payroll registries, export figures, the kind of material you catalog, analyze, and archive. The shift happened quietly, not in folklore, not in oral legend, in photographs. Glass plate negatives from Russian imperial archives, expedition albums preserved in the French National Library, Swedish logging company crew portraits, routine documentation of timber extraction in frozen Siberia. And in those images, standing among ordinary workers, were individuals whose scale did not fit. 9 feet, 10, sometimes 11. At first glance, it looked like distortion, but the shadows aligned. The snow compressed evenly. The depth of field was consistent. And the more I looked, the less the official explanations held. The first instinct is skepticism, perspective distortion, forced depth, a tall man positioned closer to the lens. That explanation works once, maybe twice. It does not survive repetition, because these images were not isolated curiosities, not one photograph, not two, entire crews, across decades, across archives. Russian imperial collections contain dozens of glass plate negatives dated between the 1870s and early 1900s. French scientific expeditions operating along the Yenisei River in 1891 produced gelatin silver prints documenting timber surveys. Swedish logging companies active in northern Siberia preserved meticulous crew records, including formal work rosters accompanied by photographs. In each collection, the same anomaly appears. Men standing 3 to 4 feet taller than their colleagues. Not exaggerated proportions, not distorted limbs. Fully proportional bodies, scaled upward, arms longer, hands larger, shoulders broader. Everything consistent with anatomical growth, simply at a different magnitude. The technological context matters. These photographs predate sophisticated image manipulation. Late 19th century plate photography required long exposures and chemical processing that left little room for seamless fabrication. Shadows fall in coherent directions across every subject. Snow beneath each boot compresses evenly. Tree trunks in the background maintain scale integrity. If these were staged illusions, they were executed with technical precision decades ahead of available methods. But the photographers were not advertising spectacles. They were documenting labor. The captions read plainly: timber extraction crew, winter transport unit, river staging camp, no reference to unusual stature, no exclamation marks, no commentary. The giants, if that is what they were, are simply present, integrated, unremarkable. They are mid-task, holding crosscut saws, bracing felled trunks, standing in formation for routine documentation. They were simply there. The French expedition report from 1891 provides the only clinical description, and even that is restrained. It notes the presence of indigenous workers of extraordinary physical development, estimating heights between 2.7 and 3.2 meters. That translates to roughly 9 to 10.5 feet. The language is dry, observational. Several individuals employed for heavy timber work, valued for strength exceeding that of normal laborers. Then the report moves on to discuss wood density and river transport logistics. No alarm, no fascination, as if encountering multiple 10-foot workers was unusual, but not inexplicable. What unsettles me most is the frequency. These were not singular medical anomalies documented for scientific curiosity. Not one pathological case of gigantism. Groups, multiple individuals within the same frame, sometimes 3 or 4 among a crew of 20 standard-sized men. If gigantism were the cause, we would expect skeletal distortion, disproportion, visible strain. Yet, in the higher resolution prints, proportions remain symmetrical. Hands the size of dinner plates, gripping axe handles, faces scaled naturally, clothing identical to their peers, only larger. The winter coats fit, the boots match, the fur hats sit proportionally. They were not dressed as exhibits. They were dressed for labor. And then there is the pattern of time. The photographs cluster heavily between 1870 and 1910. After approximately 1911 to 1913, The images stop, not gradually, abruptly. Russian archives shift to entirely standard-sized crews. Swedish company records continue documenting logging operations, but the unusually tall workers vanish. French expedition photography ceases to include them without explanation. The technology of photography improved during this period, becoming more accessible and widespread. If anything, documentation should have increased. Instead, it contracts. Then the records stop. No official notice, no demographic explanation, no mention of migration or decline, just absence. At first, you question the anomaly. Then you question the explanation. Eventually, you begin to question the silence. The photographs alone raise questions. The tools make those questions mechanical. Siberian crosscut saws preserved in regional museums and rural salvage yards measure between 12 and 16 feet in total length. That is not a minor variation from European or American logging saws of the same period. It is nearly double. The standard explanation is simple. Siberian timber was massive. Larger trees required larger blades. That sounds reasonable until you compare forestry data. Old growth forests in North America and Scandinavia produced trunks of comparable diameter, yet their saws rarely exceeded 8 or 9 feet. Size of timber alone does not justify a blade stretching 16 feet. Then there is the handle spacing. On multiple surviving specimens, the grips are positioned 40 to 50 inches apart. A normal-sized man operating such a saw would need to fully extend both arms to reach the handles. That eliminates mechanical leverage. It reduces efficiency. It turns the tool into a strain device rather than an advantage. But for someone standing 9 or 10 feet tall, with proportional arm length, that spacing becomes ergonomic. The motion becomes natural. The leverage returns. Axes recovered from documented Siberian logging regions show handles measuring 7 feet in length. Splitting mauls weighing 80 pounds. Pike poles extended beyond lengths practical for average human balance. These are not ceremonial objects. They show wear patterns, edge sharpening, handle abrasion, impact fractures. The metal is mushroomed from repeated use. The wood grips are polished by hands that held them daily. Functional tools, not decorative exaggerations. The sleds tell a similar story. Massive timber transport sleds discovered in remote Siberian permafrost zones are constructed almost identically to standard field sleds, except scaled nearly double. The pulling harness measures approximately 7 feet from shoulder mount to load attachment. Structural load capacity suggests weight that would require either a team of horses or several unusually powerful men. These sleds are found miles from any settlement large enough to justify ceremonial use. They bear scoring marks from frozen ground transport. They were working equipment. Individually, each anomaly can be dismissed: oversized timber, regional preference, experimental design, but together they form a coherent ergonomic system. Tools scaled for bodies larger than our own, not symbolic, not mythic, practical. If these implements were built for standard workers, they were inefficient. If they were built for workers 9 to 11 feet tall, they make sense. And engineering rarely wastes material without reason. The tools suggest scale. The camps confirm it. Abandoned logging settlements scattered throughout the Siberian taiga follow a familiar pattern: bunkhouses, supply sheds, equipment shelters, crude but functional timber construction meant to endure harsh winters before seasonal relocation. These were not manor houses, not administrative headquarters. Temporary worker accommodations built under brutal conditions where excess lumber meant excess labor. And yet, the proportions are wrong. Doorways measuring 10 to 12 feet in height, ceilings approaching 12 feet, and structures officially described as simple bunkhouses. Sleeping platforms elevated 36 inches off the ground, far too high for an average-sized man to sit comfortably before lying down. Dining tables positioned at heights that would leave the feet of ordinary workers suspended above the floor. Benches scaled upward beyond ergonomic necessity. One structure might be dismissed as overbuilt, two as regional style. But dozens of camps, documented across vast stretches of Siberia between 1870 and 1910, repeat the same oversized dimensions. The consistency matters. Temporary shelters do not waste timber for aesthetic reasons. They are built to need. Every additional foot of height increases material cost and construction time in an environment where both were precious. Why build larger than necessary? Official architectural commentary attributes the dimensions to ventilation requirements or insulation strategies against extreme cold. Yet ceiling height does not require 12-foot door frames. Elevated sleeping platforms do not demand oversized entryways. The proportional relationship remains scaled upward across structural elements. And like the tools, these structures were not ceremonial. They show use. Wear along thresholds, smoke residue near ceiling beams, compression marks on platform supports. People lived here, worked here, slept here. If the occupants average 6 feet tall, the architecture is inefficient. If some occupants approach 10 feet, the dimensions become rational. Architecture reflects bodies, and these camps were built for bodies larger than ours. The most restrained confirmation does not come from folklore or rumor. It comes from a French expedition report dated 1891, compiled during a commercial survey near the Yenisei River. The document was not written to shock. It was written to assess timber quality, labor efficiency, and transport viability. Buried within its practical observations is a brief notation. Several individuals of exceptional height, estimated between 2.7 and 3.2 meters, employed in heavy timber operations. Their physical capacity exceeded that of normal laborers. They were described not as curiosities, but as assets. 2.7 to 3.2 meters, 9 to 10.5 feet tall. The tone is clinical, no disbelief, no sensational language, no attempt to explain. The foreman reportedly indicated that such workers were commonly employed throughout the region for tasks requiring unusual strength. Then the report returns to logistics. River depth, ice flow, yield projections. That absence of drama is striking. Extraordinary stature treated as operational detail. Russian Imperial Archives echo the same quiet normalization. Crew rosters list names without notation of abnormality. Swedish logging company records from overlapping territories include group photographs in which towering individuals stand beside average-sized men, cataloged without comment. The pattern holds. Document, file, move on. Then the records stop. Around 1911 to 1913, the photographic evidence ceases. Not gradually, abruptly. Russian archives continue documenting logging operations, but the unusually tall workers disappear from images. French and German industrial surveys of Siberian resources no longer reference individuals of extraordinary stature. Swedish company rosters continue in meticulous detail, yet no further giants appear in the frames. Logging did not stop. Timber extraction expanded. Photographic technology improved. Administrative documentation became more standardized in the years leading to the Russian Revolution. If anything, workforce recording should have intensified. Instead, this specific category vanishes. The Russian Revolution of 1917 provides convenient cover. Archives were damaged, institutions restructured, records lost. But the shift predates the revolution. The disappearance begins before political collapse, before war disruption, before systemic archival destruction. Then the records stop. No commentary, no explanation, no demographic transition documented, no migration noted, no epidemic recorded targeting only the tallest workers in Siberia. They are present for 4 decades. Then they are not. Silence is not evidence, but patterns of silence are. Siberia is not an isolated case. Once you recognize the configuration, the pattern extends beyond a single region. Logging operations in the Russian Far East display similar photographic anomalies during the same window of time. Crew portraits from areas bordering the Ural Mountains show identical scale discrepancies. In northern Scandinavia, where Swedish and Norwegian operations overlapped with Russian territories, archived work images occasionally reveal the same phenomenon. 1, sometimes 2 individuals towering above their peers, integrated into routine labor documentation. Not posed, not highlighted, working. The distribution is geographically wide but temporally narrow. Late 19th century, early 20th. Then the same cutoff appears. Around 1910 to 1913, the figures disappear across multiple national archives, different languages, different governments, different industrial firms, yet the visual record shifts in near unison. That alignment matters. Independent institutions rarely synchronize archival silence without cause. Historians confronted with these images acknowledge their authenticity, then default to perspective distortion. Museum curators catalog oversized tools as ceremonial or unclear industrial purpose. Architectural historians attribute disproportionate structures to regional style. Each anomaly is treated separately, isolated, contained, never connected. It is not active denial. It is avoidance, a quiet refusal to follow the implication where it leads. Because to accept that entire work crews included individuals 9 to 11 feet tall would require revising more than labor history. It would challenge biological assumptions, demographic models, the boundaries of what we consider recently possible. So the pattern remains fragmented. Photographs in one archive, tools in another, camps in remote forests, a French report written in passing, individually dismissible, collectively difficult, and always confined to that narrow window before the record closes. I keep returning to one photograph, dated 1907, taken near Krasnoyarsk during a timber survey. The image shows a crew of 10 men standing before a stack of freshly cut logs. 9 of them are clearly of average height. You can judge scale by the cabin behind them, by the stacked timber, by the snow line against the doorway. And then there is the 10th. He does not stand forward. He is not centered. He is not elevated. He is simply among them. His head rises nearly 3 feet above the others. His shoulders are proportionally broad. His hands rest easily against a log that requires 2 standard men to brace. He wears the same winter coat, the same fur hat, the same heavy boots. Nothing theatrical, nothing exaggerated. They are colleagues. That is what makes the image unsettling, not spectacle, normalcy. He is not presented as the tallest man in Russia, not labeled as a curiosity, not identified in the caption. He is just another worker in a logging crew between 1870 and 1910, in a region where photographic documentation confirms that others like him stood in similar formations. And then, within a few years, they are gone. What happened to them? Not one individual, but groups, not gradually, abruptly. Why does industrial documentation grow more detailed in the 20th century, yet omit this category entirely? Why do tools remain oversized while the bodies they fit disappear from record? Why do architectural proportions persist in abandoned camps while official narratives shrink the workers back to modern scale? Perhaps there is an explanation buried in lost demographic data. Perhaps an environmental factor, a medical anomaly concentrated and resolved, or perhaps something else. History rarely erases loudly. It simplifies, it compresses, it files anomalies under convenient headings until they dissolve. The Siberian forests still hold the camps. The salvage yards still hold the tools. The archives still hold the photographs. The question is not whether the evidence exists. The question is why we stopped asking about it, and what else, once documented as ordinary, has quietly been removed from the story.